Hi everyone, Allan here. Before we get to this interview, I just wanted to begin by thanking again now after sitting down with my mom, thanking her for sitting down with me. She really doesn't like to talk about herself, but man, did she do a great job. I learned a lot about her with this conversation, and I really want to encourage you all, if you and your parents are in a place where you can sit down and have this type of conversation, it would be so helpful. It was very helpful for both of us. I feel, even though she's not here to attest to that, but I believe she says so at the end of the interview. She also mentioned that there's no way she could have done this even just 1 year ago. So give it time. If your family is having a hard time with this, it's absolutely understandable that they would be feeling that way. Also, just one last announcement. We did use new microphone equipment in an effort to help both my mom and I to feel like we were having a more casual conversation. We both sat back in our chairs and just held the mics without any mic stands, without leaning forward to talk into mics that were hooked up in a more professional manner. So for that reason, you'll hear some shuffling of the mics from time to time, but it's a minor price to pay. Hope you enjoy. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Marriage with Tightrope. I'm Allan.
And I'm Elaine.
And we're not married.
Never have been.
Who are? I would hope not.
No.
Katie isn't with us today. She has been substituted for the second most important woman in my life. Is that okay to say?
Third.
Zara is my daughter supposed to be more important?
Well, I would.
What if she hasn't earned that yet?
She's not a woman, so if you're going to be
technical about it,
I'll be the second woman.
So you may have been able to figure out by now that Elaine Mount is my mother,
mommy,
and we're so excited to have you on the. Are you as excited?
Why do you say we?
We, being everyone listening, is so excited.
Okay.
You know, we have 5 million listeners.
Really?
Yeah. More popular than Joe Rogan. Yeah, we're very popular. She's shaking her head, and I don't know, just Joe Rogan. You don't want to know who Joe Rogan is. Okay. It's fine. You mean, you've been begging me to be on a guest on the podcast.
You are such a blowhard. Is that a good word? I don't know.
I will say this. So it is Sunday, April 19th. We invited you over for some
dinner.
Yes. This was not in the plans. We were talking about, in fact, on our Facebook group, we told the listeners that Katie and I are planning 2 episodes on the Word of Wisdom.
Oh.
And because just so you know, a lot of couples have a hard time knowing how to handle the Word of Wisdom.
I can imagine.
And we're going to do that. We are going to do that episode, but when you were coming over, we're just not ready. We haven't done the research that we need to in order to, and the preparation that we want to make sure we do those episodes really good. But you were coming over, and literally right before you walked in the door, and we have not hugged. We're still obeying social distancing.
Almost 6 feet.
We turned to each other, and I was like, maybe I should ask my mom if we can interview her tonight. And we've talked about it a little bit.
It's a good thing you didn't tell me before, because I
wouldn't
have enjoyed my dinner as much.
Thank you.
I'm not an extrovert like my son.
Did I get that from my father?
Oh, yes, 100%. 100%.
Well, I'm grateful for that trait. I enjoy it.
I would like a little bit more of it, actually. But
I think you
get what you get, and
you get what you get.
Don't
but you can
pitch a fit.
That's right. You've learned to hold your own.
I've come out of my shell a little bit. Yeah.
For sure. It takes that to be a missionary, because you are serving a mission right now.
I am, sort of.
Kinda.
Yes.
Now, what happened within a week of you moving into your apartment in Salt Lake City?
They closed the library. And
so family history library that you were
we were the
at.
Last group to come out of the MTC.
That's right.
Before it was closed, and now I'm in my little apartment. I've been in there for 5 weeks.
Yeah.
By myself.
If you do the math, the earthquake hit just a couple days after you moved in.
That was also exciting timing that I had.
Even though we don't get to see you as much as we would hope with having you here, it's great to see you when we do.
Yeah, and things are loosening up a little bit.
They are loosening up a little. We didn't have you in the house until last Sunday, which was Easter.
Yeah.
And we're still kind of keeping our distance. And
I wash and scour myself when I go home.
That's right.
And you probably spray everywhere I've been sitting.
Those 6 mounts, got to get them off of you. Absolutely. Well, the reason why we're having you on the podcast today is, I don't know if you know this, but we receive a lot of emails. We talk to a lot of people in a mixed faith marriage, and there are 3 of the most common topics in the email of how do I do this? One of the 3 is how do I talk to my parents about this? Whether it's the spouse who is still in, not knowing how to tell her parents or his parents about their spouse's departure or faith transition, or it varies per couple. But then also, like, how do the one that is no longer believing, how do you bring that up? So what I thought we would do...
Very difficult.
You've been through it.
I've been through it.
A few times? Unfortunately. I know. What we thought we would do is spend a little time getting to know you, because I know you love to talk about yourself.
It's my favorite topic.
And we'll just get to know you a little bit. We'll treat it like a normal interview. I'll pretend I don't know anything about you. So you don't know the question I'm asking. I might not know the answer to, but I'm just going to pretend like I do. And then we'll go into, this is for you and for the listener. We'll go into, when did this, a few of your children, when did that begin? How did it feel at first? I know that's not going to be an easy thing to talk about. And also, over the course of this all happening in 2017, have some of the things that have made it easier for you to, I don't know if accept is the right word, but deal with this situation with your kids? How much of that was done by your kids versus just other outside support that you found? I think what do you think? Do you think that's feasible to do in the next 45 minutes?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We'll touch on it anyway.
We'll do as much as we can. You're super awesome and brave for doing this. Before we jump in, you may notice that our sound, I don't know, maybe our sound is better, maybe it's not, but I will say this, it is much more comfortable now to record with 2 people, usually me and Katie, now with me and you, because a couple of weeks ago on one of our episodes, my back was done because we were recording over one microphone and we would be hunched over it. Oh. And so we just said, if anybody out there is able to donate so that we can get some microphones and a mixer so that we can have 2 microphones and just be more casual and not hunched over this one mic, that would be super helpful. And within a week, we had 3 donors. One, Brian, thank you so much, literally bought these microphones that we're holding and shipped it to us.
Wow.
Via Amazon. And Clark and Monta both donated exactly the amount of money we needed for the mixer. So thank you very much.
That's very nice.
To the 3 of you. My mother thanks you for the comfort.
I'm amazed at the technology in front of me.
There's a lot. We've got a halo light on the webcam for when we live stream. This is the workspace. We're sitting in my office where I work, and this space is like, if I'm going to sit here for 10 hours a day, let's make it nice.
Interesting. Yeah.
Let's start. Let's get to know who this Elaine Mount is.
Okay.
Where did you grow up? Let's start with that.
My first 10 years of my life I spent in Scotland. I was born in Scotland.
Kirkcaldy, yes.
Kirkcaldy, near Edinburgh.
If any of you economics majors are listening and recognize the name Kirkcaldy, that's where Adam Smith was from.
That is right.
The father of modern economics.
In the middle of the town, there's a big hall called the Adam Smith Hall.
I love it.
And it was across the Firth of Forth from Edinburgh. Right
the
across.
Firth and Forth.
The Firth of Forth.
The Firth of Forth.
Is a big inlet. A firth is an inlet of water.
I didn't know anything but Colin Firth before you had said the name Firth. That's great. Okay.
So we were right across, and our big vacation was to get on the train and go across the Firth of Forth and spend the day in Edinburgh.
Wow. So at 10, you moved to the United States.
Yes, we did.
You
Long
went
Beach, California.
Long Beach, beautiful area. Beautiful Long Beach, California.
It was.
And, I mean, so your formative years were spent in Southern California?
Yep, from 10. Well,
most of your years were spent
all my years until 2009.
Yeah.
We were in California.
That's right. So what was your, I mean, this being a mixed faith marriage podcast, what was your religious upbringing?
Well, Scotland is predominantly Presbyterian, I believe. And our family went to the Presbyterian church. We went to the Church of Christ too, and I don't know exactly why we did both, but we went to two different churches. Might have been the children's part was the Church of Christ, and anyway, we went to those two churches, and then when we moved to Long Beach, we sought out a Presbyterian church.
And you found it.
And found it, and
yeah,
went to that for a number of years.
I remember going to a few Presbyterian masses. Do you call them mass?
Just services on Christmas.
I remember doing Christmas with Grandma.
Yeah.
Grandma Minnie.
Grandma Minnie.
You think of the most Scottish people, and this was Grandma Minnie and Grandpa David.
Yep.
They were, if you've seen So I Married an Axe Murderer, that was them. It's
a very good depiction of the Scottish marriage
Yeah.
relationship. Yes.
Okay, so you're in Long Beach. Obviously, you didn't grow up LDS.
No.
So how did you get introduced to the church?
Actually, we moved a lot when I was in California because my dad worked for a company that built nuclear power plants, and it took 2 years to build a plant, and he was the accountant. So we moved every 2 years, which was really hard. I didn't like it, but one of the moves, my sister and I met some kids who were members of a Baptist church, and we got really friendly with the family, and we started going to the Baptist church.
Yeah.
And my parents
with your parents? Or
no, they were still Presbyterian church.
Okay.
Now there wasn't a big difference in the doctrine. There was some.
Sure.
But as kids, it was probably more of a social thing.
Right.
But it was a more open religion, the Presbyterian church was very kind of
Orthodox?
Yeah.
What'd you say?
You go on Sunday, go to the meeting, and then that was it.
Okay.
The Baptist church was a little more relaxed, and we got to know the members more outside of the Sunday meeting.
All right.
So my sister and I, from the time I was a freshman in high school, from then on, I went to the Baptist church.
Wow. Okay. So then, all throughout high school, basically.
Yep.
Your introduction to the LDS church. Your parents were fine with you going to the Baptist church?
They were okay with that. My sister was 3 years older than me, and at one point we wanted to join the church, and my parents did not want us to do that. No, they didn't mind that we went, but they didn't want us to join. My sister went ahead and joined because she was 18, I think, and I wasn't, so I didn't.
Yeah.
But that caused a little friction in the family, but I don't remember it going on for very long.
Okay.
Religion has always been important to me and her for some reason.
Well, you have memories throughout your whole life with it looks like, right? From Presbyterian to Baptist.
But it wasn't a topic in our home.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So you went to church, you would come back, and then you're going about your lives. That was it. I don't really remember your parents talking religion at all.
Nope.
With us?
No.
Not at all.
We didn't ever talk about it. We sometimes had a prayer, but not very often at the meal. That happened later. When I was an adult and I'd go back to my parents, they would always have a little blessing on the food. But I don't remember that so much as a child. Although I thought about religion more than just on Sunday, but it wasn't a discussion point in our family.
Interesting. Did you want it to be, or was it just kind of that's what it was?
That's just what it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it after high school that you got introduced to the LDS church, or during?
We moved down we lived in Cucamonga when I was in high school, California.
Yeah. And
then we moved down to Anaheim when I was a junior, the middle of my junior year, which was traumatic for me. It was very hard because I was very shy.
Thank you for not moving in the middle of my junior year.
Yeah.
It was good to keep those friends.
I was so happy to have my kids. We stayed in the same school district for 40 years.
Yeah, that was a big help, man.
And you guys probably wouldn't have had as much trouble as I did, but I really struggled.
Sure.
Because I was very, very shy. Anyway, one of the first people I met at school was a Baptist girl, and so I started going to church with her. Yeah. And my parents they had found a Presbyterian church, and so, it wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
But I started feeling kind of alone at some of the activities because my family wasn't there.
Okay, so at the Baptist church, you started to feel alone
a little bit
because you were there. Yeah, you had some new friends you were making, but it was like you're probably seeing other families that are there
that were together. Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. So that was in my senior year. Oh, in the middle of my senior year, one of the girls that I sat next to in school alphabetically was a member of the church.
Of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saint.
Yeah. Our names were ST. And so we got to be friends, and she said, I'd like you to go to the stake dance with me. And I had no idea what a stake dance was.
Yeah.
And
what did you think it was?
I thought it was probably a dinner and a dance.
And you're going to get some steak.
Yeah.
What a church.
She took me to the stake dance. That was in January of 1965.
I know the timeline, so I think I know where this is headed.
Yeah. And so the first boy that I met there was Baptist, and we dated a little bit.
That could have backfired hard on the church.
On the church, yeah. In August of that year, I met Dad at the dance.
Jimmy D.
Jimmy D.
Did he go by Jim still then, or was he Jimmy because he was younger?
It depended. His family called him Jimmy.
Okay.
But he was pretty much Jim to me.
He was Jim.
Yeah, he was
Okay.
never Jimmy to me. But anyway, we met. He was actually the first dance that I met him at. He was in a group called the Last Day Singers, and they sang at intermission of this dance. This was a dance in Long Beach that every week there was like 350 kids there. It was huge. People came from miles around to this dance. So I had been going there since January, met him in August, and he just kind of swept me off my feet.
It was easy for him because physically, describe him physically at that point.
He was 6'8", and I don't know how much he weighed. I mean, he was thin, but he was strong.
He's a basketball player.
He was a basketball
hard
player
worker
in college. Yeah. And I was just going into college, and he just kind of took over and said, "I'll go with you. I'll get you signed up, and we'll sign up for your classes." And it wasn't online or anything, so you had to go. And
sure,
he met me that day, and we went out the next weekend together. Happened fast. But
so soon after that, I assume you started dating.
We both were dating someone else at the time, but we both broke up pretty fast.
I'm going with Jim.
Yeah.
So how soon after you started dating did the conversation about the church, and not that it was a single conversation, but when did it become clear that if this was going to go somewhere, just how did that introduction to the church itself, if you remember?
I don't remember the timing month-wise. I know that we started, he would go to church with me in the morning. I would
Baptist?
Yes. And then I would go with him because his sacrament was in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And then I do remember a lot of times we would sit in the car and argue about. It wasn't just discussing, it was arguing.
It was arguing.
Yeah.
What were some of was it just probably the big differences between Mormonism and Christianity that you had grown up with?
Yeah.
What were some of the, I mean, this is more of a detour question, but I think it's important, is what are some of the things about, just if you can rewind to that point in your life, what are some of the tenets of Christianity that really spoke to you?
To me?
Yeah, what
of the Baptist and Presbyterian faith?
Yeah, and I'm sure many of them still carry through to your beliefs. That's
I
important to
believed
you.
strongly in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so I felt that as I got into investigating the Mormon Church, not even formally investigating, but just finding out about it, I didn't see the need for another book of Scripture.
Yeah.
And so that was a big...
3 more.
Yeah. So that was an issue. And then, the Trinity, I remember the Trinity being a topic of discussion.
Yeah.
And I think I was basically very defensive.
It's hard not to be with your very core held beliefs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did have a lot of heated discussions.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was good or bad, but that's what it was.
Yeah. I'll ask the question 2 different ways. What convinced you then to join the Mormon Church? The other way of asking that is, tell me about your conversion story.
Oh. Okay, so Dad very either wisely or cunningly said, I will take missionary lessons from your church if you will take them from my church. I don't know if he knew that we didn't have any missionaries.
But he knew that
probably
he did. Yeah.
We had missionaries, but they all went to Africa. They didn't teach locally.
Right.
So I said, okay. So then we started the missionary lessons. Again, I think I was very defensive in most of the lessons, and I wasn't open. I wasn't really open to finding out. I was just trying to prove my point.
Yeah. You said at the beginning of the podcast you're pretty introverted.
Very.
And I can attest to this. I've got 37 years of experience to attest to that. But it's already easy to argue about religion, but now add that you're an introvert and you could feel like a dog backed into a corner if everybody in the room believes differently than you.
Yeah.
So looking back to you, was there a pivotal moment in the discussions that something kind of clicked or something changed?
There definitely was. At one point, the young elders turned me over to the stake missionaries. There were stake missionaries at that time. And I guess the elders can work with you for a certain amount of time. And then,
we got to get rid of this one.
Yeah, this one's going nowhere. Get rid of her.
So, this is a dead end, guys.
So they sent me to the stake missionaries. And so we started meeting in their house. And his wife was present. And I remember that being a different feeling.
Okay. So when there was another woman, or just the home itself?
Just their home.
Okay.
And their relationship. Just watching them together. I remember kind of being a little bit like, I really like their relationship. And so anyway, that was kind of maybe the beginning. I think I only had 2 or 3 lessons there though. But the one lesson, and I think that Dad, maybe both of us fasted.
Yeah.
I know Dad fasted because I had gotten to the point where I said, I don't know that we should be together anymore because this isn't going anywhere. And it was important to me that we be together on religion because I had those years when I wasn't.
And you knew what that felt like.
And I knew that I wanted to be united in that.
Sure.
So I had said that to him and he didn't like that at all. At that point, you had 6 lessons. And I had already had the 6 lessons. And so the missionaries were kind of doing a recap of this.
Yeah.
It wasn't even the last lesson. It was just, they were going through everything, all at once. I had this really strong experience that just came over me suddenly at the end of this meeting that this was good. This was right.
Yeah.
And that, I can't explain it. Especially to you.
Hey.
You can delete that if you want.
I don't want to delete that. You have every right to make any comment you want.
Well, it is a little, it's a little strange.
Having this conversation like this?
Explaining spiritual experiences to people, period.
Sure.
And to explain it to, a family member who no longer believes that. It's a little odd.
Yeah,
but
I understand.
I had this very strong feeling that this was right. Dad's story was that these people had this big mirror on their wall, and he was looking in the mirror at me, and he said he could just see my face change. And I remember leaving that house just feeling almost like elated. I just felt like I was kind of floating. It was a beautiful experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
I'm grateful for that experience.
Yeah. Well, I certainly was. So
that's awesome. Thank you. And honestly, hey, I have a hard time judging my own experiences, so I'm certainly not going to judge yours.
Yeah.
So that's great. That's really good. You have a courtship. It ends up working out. You join the church.
And,
you wait a year.
Had a lot of friends. Had a lot of friends that were kind of not wanting me to do that.
Sure.
Watch out for those Mormons, and my parents weren't happy about it.
Were you
different
worried?
Than me joining, or because I never did join
different
the Baptist.
Than Baptist.
It was, yeah. It was a bigger.
You think there's just a negative? The Mormon Church is kind of has this chip on its not chip on its shoulder, but there's just a negative connotation for a lot of other Christian faiths.
There is a little bit of it.
I think there still is.
My parents, I remember them saying, "Oh, here she goes again." Like, she's done this before. Here she's going to go to another one now.
Right. Right. This
And
isn't going to stick.
No.
It stuck.
They loved your dad, which
Good.
was a positive. They just really thought a lot of him, and so that probably helped the situation. They didn't come to my baptism, and they...
Was that hard that they didn't come, or did you get it?
I got it.
I mean, it could be hard and you could get it at the same time. I mean,
I don't remember being extremely disappointed that they didn't come, time-wise.
It happens, and it's funny to think of this experience of you leaving one faith, going to the other, when we're on a podcast talking about leaving one faith. And sometimes it goes to another. Other times it goes nowhere.
I know. Well, believe me, I've thought of that in relationship to my kids, making these changes.
Yeah. And we'll get there for sure. Last week we were talking with Natasha Helfer Parker in our little online course that we're doing, and she made that connection. She said, you know, think about people leaving their faith and joining our church, and it's celebrate, celebrate, celebrate. But if someone leaves ours, it's the end of the world. And what about the people that are in that other faith that just got left? Like they're feeling bad too. So it's more about just groups in general. Mm-hmm. It's celebrated when people either think or believe the same, and then it's hard when they decide not to anymore, whatever the belief is.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So you're married. Married in the temple? We
got married civilly. First. Believe it or not, nobody said anything to me about the temple.
When you were really?
When we were engaged, getting ready to get married, no bishop never talked to me about the temple.
I'm flabbergasted.
I know. I didn't even really know about the temple.
So you're engaged. You're not thinking like, oh, this is great. I'm going to be married. I'm going to be sealed to him forever. Was the whole teaching of eternal families something that was like, this is perfect? Or was it more of it's important that we have the same faith. I've had this experience, and so now I get that.
Yeah, I would say that.
Okay.
That it was more of a personal, spiritual feeling.
So
I wasn't drawn to eternal, because I don't remember that being a big discussion.
So you got married civilly first.
We got married in August, and I had been baptized in April. We got married in August, a year to the day that we had met.
Right.
Then we moved up to a different area. So we were not... See, at first we were in the ward that Dad had grown up in. Mm-hmm. And then we moved, and we were in a new ward, new young ward, and they had us attend a temple preparation class. And so we started doing that, and that's where I started hearing, explained to me. So in April, the following April, our bishop gave us our recommend, stake president gave us a recommend, we go to the temple, and we go into the temple, and they say, well, you can't go through the temple because you haven't been married for a year. Because it was from August to April.
You didn't tell them that? Whoa. So they didn't tell you that until you were in the temple?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Getting in the front door of the temple, and they said...
This is not me acting surprised. I do not know this story.
No, maybe I haven't told you that. I've told some people, but anyway, it's not a secret.
Sure.
But anyway, they looked at our recommend, and my baptism date was a year.
Was a year. Isn't that the rule?
That's the way it is now.
Oh.
But back then, you had to be married a year civilly before you could go to the temple.
Interesting.
So there we are, standing,
now what?
And there were several people from our ward who came, and because there was another family being sealed that day. And so our bishop happened to be there. And so they said, well, we're going to talk to your bishop. And so they talked to him. And then they came back, and then they said, well, we're going to call Salt Lake. And so they called Salt Lake. They came back later, and I didn't, I was so new.
Yeah. What were you thinking at this point?
I just didn't know what to think. I was probably very nervous. I remember having a bad headache at the end of the day.
Yeah,
and that probably contributed to it, because I didn't know anything about the temple.
Right.
Jim's parents nor mine had been.
And right.
And all we knew was what we had learned in that class, and it wasn't like the classes today. It was more of the history of the temple. And
sure.
They came back out and said that the First Presidency had given us permission to go ahead and go through the temple that day.
So let's see, this is 1967?
67, yeah.
So the First Presidency at that time, it was David O. McKay. and his counselors.
Fellow Scotchman. I was N. Eldon Tanner, and I think Marion G. Romney.
Okay. Ooh, Mitz Papa.
Yeah.
All right. Very cool.
So we go through the temple, and it was very
new,
unusual.
Sure.
And
a lot of people can relate to their first experience. I remember mine very well, and the next day was Fast Sunday, and I told the entire ward of how it was so weird, but I'm excited to go back and learn more. And the patriarch pulled me aside after sacrament and ripped me a new one for saying what I had said.
Really? Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, sorry, your story.
Well, no, I remember in years after that worrying about when my kids went through, because it was different to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, what are my kids going to feel like? Are they how are they going to feel about this? Anyway, as far as I knew, you all had good experiences.
Mm-hmm. I didn't have a bad experience.
It wasn't a bad experience.
No, it was just very different.
It was very different. Yeah.
I interpret it differently now than I did before, but while I was still in, it wasn't anything of alarm to me.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So
now you're married.
Now we're married in the temple.
So looking at the time, we're 35 minutes in. So it'd be great to do. Now this is probably halfway point-ish.
Yeah.
And so it would be very cool. Let's talk about raising the kids. You're raising them in the church. What were some things that you felt like the church really helped with? What were the things that raising kids in the church was really good? And we won't even flip the coin and say what was really bad, but it's why was the church important in your everyday family life?
Well, it definitely gave us a structure to for teaching, and we tried to teach in the home. I don't think we were as effective as I never felt like we were as effective as we should be. And that's just probably my nature. But I felt like we were given good information, good structure to help us to teach. All of you guys were pretty rambunctious, I would say. You're being nice. We never had any picture-perfect family home evenings.
Those were hard, weren't they, right?
They were really hard. Starting with the oldest down to the youngest.
Oh, good. I'm glad that the oldest got thrown under the bus before me. That's good.
He was tough, too. He was. He's a tickler and a toucher, and he just couldn't sit still. Anyway, we probably should cut that out.
Nah, we actually want to have him on. He's currently a bishop. We want to have him on as well to talk about his experience as a bishop working with mixed faith couples. Oh, we haven't proposed that to him yet. So if he's listening,
I know he would love to do that.
We'd love to have him on. I don't know.
None of my children are introverts, by the way.
None, not a one. All 6 of them, and it's just. I think it might even just get worse as it goes because it ends on a high or low note, however you look at it.
You're definitely the most extroverted.
I don't know any other stories about the church with your kids coming up.
I loved the structure, and I loved the guidance that it gave to you because I felt like even though comparing the world then to the world today, it's a lot more challenging now. It was still very challenging, and I felt like your membership in the church and your acceptance of the commandments and the teachings was a definite help to all of you and keeping you mostly out of trouble.
Right. I mean, no one's perfect.
Right. None of you were perfect. But I think that, and maybe I depended on the church more than I should have, but I always felt like, if we were trying our best to live the commandments and do what we thought was right, that things would work out. And I felt like they did. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, I mean, no one died.
No one died.
No, I can jump in to talk about the home experience just for 30 seconds.
We had to take longer if you want.
We had I had a great experience growing up in the Mount home and in the church. Growing up in Santa Barbara, California wasn't too shabby. We kind of skipped a lot of the details of what took you there, but that was not only a beautiful and awesome place to grow up, but it wasn't densely LDS, but it wasn't also sparse.
Right. We had wards.
A
stake.
And a stake in there. And we were 4 miles from the stake center. And that was our church building, our meeting house that we went to every Sunday. Our neighbors across the street were LDS. That was the only other one on the street for most of my childhood until the Pratts came in. Hi. They won't be listening probably. And that's a classic LDS name too, the Pratts.
Right.
They are descendants.
They are related.
So yeah, I mean, it was good. I never felt growing up that the teachings that you were giving to us in the home from the church were bad by any stretch of the imagination. I don't really remember a lot or really any negative experiences with the church while I was growing up. I don't. I mean, you remember, and I haven't talked about it on our podcast, but I talked about it on Mormon Stories when John DeLynn interviewed us. You may recall just before my mission, some experiences with having to talk to the bishop that were very difficult. At the time, I did not see them as negative experiences. I mean, they weren't, well, yeah, they were negative experiences, but not the church's fault. It felt like it was my fault. Like I had made big mistakes and had to come back from them and finally make it out to a mission. How tender of a topic would it be to ask what it was like when you're raising kids when they are making some serious decisions that are not in line with the gospel?
That was difficult.
My situation was hard.
Well, yours was difficult. Mostly for me was watching you because you had a hard time.
Yeah.
Following that decision, the time between your decision and then the time you actually left on your mission, I think you struggled really hard.
Yeah, and by struggled, it was not with, continuing to follow the gospel. It was, for everybody, we've skipped a lot of details, but
it was almost like depression.
Yeah, I mean, I had received my mission call, then afterwards went to the bishop, not immediately, but within a month or so. And then they said, you can't go. You're going to have to resubmit your papers in a few months. I had to wait a year, basically. The closer we got to the date that I was going to leave, everyone in the ward is asking, even non-LDS friends are like, why aren't you supposed to be in Spain? That was hard.
I remember you telling me at one point that you just felt like everyone in the family was moving on and you were stuck. Mm. And you were really down about it.
Yeah, that was tough.
That was a hard time. My first reaction when you came and talked to me, of course, was I was shocked and saddened, but it didn't take me long before I felt like I was encouraged because I really felt like you were listening to the Spirit, or you wouldn't have done that.
Right.
And I thought that is a really, really neat thing because you couldn't do what you had been asked to do because you didn't feel like, you
sure.
And I felt like that was a really good thing.
Yeah. I remember telling you and Dad saying, and you tried to shut him up. I remember this. Do you remember that moment where I won't use exactly his words? Not that he didn't curse or anything, but he said, it was this, wasn't it? It was this, wasn't it? And I said, yes, Dad. He's, I told you to be careful. And you're like, Jim. And he flared up and got upset, which was predictable and understandable.
Yeah. And
you went into the kitchen and I just sat there and he went into the bedroom. You went to the kitchen and I sat there and you just went to the sink and just started crying. And I sat there and went, oh my gosh. And then do you know what I did after that? I did a tour. I went to James Tate's house. Knocked on his door,
gone. Yeah.
And I said, I want you to learn a lesson from this because I can't go on my mission because of the choices I've made. Don't do it. And he hugged me, and then I went to my ex-girlfriend's house, who was not LDS, and I told her. She was really mad at the church, and then mad at me because she essentially thought I was telling her I regret everything I regret our relationship. And it's how do you explain that in a 5-minute at the door conversation? Mm-hmm. And that was like the last time we talked in person, really. She came to my farewell, but other than that, like it's been 20 years almost.
I talked to her. I don't know if I ever told you that.
Did you?
Called her and talked to her.
Really?
Yeah.
About this?
I just wanted her to know that there were no,
I had no idea.
Yeah, I just wanted, because I knew her pretty well.
Yeah, she was around a lot.
At our house a
we
lot,
dated for over a year.
And I just told her I was sorry that things had ended,
Yeah.
however it had ended, and that I had no hard feelings, and that I really liked her, and that was
she was
our
great.
little conversation.
That I had no idea. That's very nice of you to do.
It wasn't easy because, I don't like to do things like that.
I know. Well, that's a good little side tangent story.
Yeah.
Fun. That was the only mistake I ever made in my life. So now it's documented. So, okay. So, I don't know. Before we get to now, we can talk about your kids. What started in your mind? What started the departure or the loss of faith? I guess you could say the transitioning of faith. Anything else in the kind of the child rearing years and kids going on missions and getting married themselves that you'd like to talk about?
I just felt like very blessed, and I didn't feel like we in any way forced anybody to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
We had, and you weren't compliant personalities, but we never had issues of you guys refusing to go to church or refusing to go to seminary, or we just didn't deal with that, and I always felt like that was a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you didn't always want to go, and you didn't always want to do what you did, and you're pretty strong personalities, so it kind of surprises me that we didn't have
any.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. For me, it was just, this is what we do. It's what we always did. We always went to the church. We always went to seminary. That's part of the program.
Because I remember Dad saying to me at one point, well, as long as they live in our house, they're going to go to church. And I said, well, how are you going to get a 20-year-old or 18-year-old man to church if he says he doesn't want to go? I mean, I didn't see it as, that automatic.
And that never happened.
And it never happened. So
well, that was a bullet
we were
dodged.
Very blessed. Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
So, and I don't think it was fear of Dad at all, because he just didn't have to threaten.
He didn't have to threaten. I mean, he threatened, but not about the church.
Not about the church, yeah.
He was a red personality, for those that understand what that means.
Yeah.
But he never, you're right. He never had to threaten about the church.
It just never was an issue, which is unusual.
Yeah. We're already going through it with ours. And I think part of that is when you do have a united front, and as husband and wife, and you can have a united front while you don't agree. Our lesson today at home church was respectfully disagreeing, and openly, we didn't talk about anything religious, but openly acknowledging that Mom and I don't always agree with each other, but we do so respectfully. But having the beliefs align, the message is so clear to the kids that that's probably a part of it. I think that in a mixed faith marriage, part of the active teaching of the kids that it's okay to disagree and you can believe what you're going to believe and let's talk about it. I think that something happens in the mind, and I'm thinking specifically of our oldest, something happens in the mind that he knows it's okay
to disagree,
to think differently, and it's okay to talk about it. And he told us, we talked about it on the podcast, I don't know if you heard it, but he told us a month and a half ago he's atheist. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, and I was very impressed with especially Katie's reaction of, why do you say that? And we just talked about it, and of the kids of yours that have moved on, some of them I bet all of them would attribute their transition of faith to varying degrees. They would attribute it to what ended up happening to our father, which is certainly not a fun topic to talk about. From your point of view, I mean, maybe so you don't have to be the one to explain what happened. I think we've talked about it here a number of times on the podcast, but I'll do a little brief overview. From a spiritual and belief sense, I'd love to hear what you think about what that event meant, and if that was kind of the catalyst, if that kicked things off for people, just from your eyes, what you saw. So in August 2013, my father was struck by a drunk driver and ended up living for 1 week in the hospital and then passed. We could dedicate a whole episode to that experience, much more than just one episode as well. It was terrible. It brought us closer together, those that were still here. The community just wrapped us up. His funeral was one of the I'll say one of the most memorable days that I can't imagine how it could be topped as one of the top 3 memorable days of my life. Because it was an extremely positive day. Awful that it had to happen.
Yeah, it was
right?
both extremes.
It was walking into the chapel and it was full. And you guys had only been in Georgia for 4 years. And I think that spoke deeply to who he was. And the, I'm not the one that's supposed to cry. Just the man that he was and how he immersed himself in
people
serving others. And in 4 short years had really become a big member of the community in more ways than just 6'8".
Yep. You take his extroverted personality and his life experiences, because he became much more service oriented and giving the older he got.
Right.
And especially the last 10 years of his life, he was kind of a different person in a couple of different ways, but
sure.
He developed a compassion and a caring for people that was just really pretty neat.
It was very cool to see. So that awful event happens. Do you attribute that to any of your kids and their transitioning? Was there ever a point that you blamed it on that? If this wouldn't have happened, they would still be a believing.
Well,
member
for
of the
me,
church.
I cannot for the life of me see how that would trigger what happened.
Okay.
For me, that week and subsequent weeks were, I felt the Spirit very strongly, and I felt like we did as a family. And perhaps, I think that you have said that triggered some things for you, and I think for other of your siblings, maybe.
Sure.
I think one other one has said that to me.
Yeah.
I don't really understand that. I've never been able to feel like that could be a trigger.
Sure.
But one of the big difficulties for me was that I didn't know what was going on
With your kids?
with my kids for a long time.
Yeah.
I don't even know when it started. I didn't find out until they had already
Made the decision.
2 of them, at least, had made the decision to leave.
Yeah.
And then they told me. And for me, that was a really difficult thing. It was really difficult.
What do you think you would have... How would you have? I'm not saying that right.
No, I know what you mean. How would have I
reacted
handled
if
it?
they would have told you earlier? They would have told you like, "Hey, Mom," and what would you expect them to say in that moment? Because I think this is an important question, because a lot of times, I can speak for myself, a lot of times when you start to question or you're starting to research church history or starting to open up emotionally about some of the things that you've experienced, you expect it to resolve itself. So you don't say anything to anybody, sometimes not even your wife or your husband. You have some issues. I'm going to figure this out. I'm just going to read one more thing. I'm just going to listen to one more podcast. I'm just going to talk to one more bishop. And you think that it's all going to sort itself out. And then when it doesn't, you found yourself concluded and you're like, well, shoot, now I have to tell my mom and dad.
Well, and I think it came so soon after Dad's death that probably that factored into your decisions to not say anything, because maybe you felt like I was, in a precarious...
Not in a place to
handle anything like that.
It was a little different for me. I never really told you this is my conclusion. I never had this sit-down moment with you. I was in Utah. You were in Georgia. 2017. So the accident happened August of 2013. And it wasn't until 2017 that some of the other siblings, 2 other siblings, came to you in the beginning 5 or 6 months of that year to say, this is how things are now. I wasn't one of those. Well,
do you want to hear how it happened to me?
With me?
With everybody.
Please, yeah.
And you don't...
We'll keep it in, but we don't need to name names.
Right. So,
even though I'm sure they would be fine with it.
So at one point, we were all in the same ward in Georgia.
Right.
There's 4 families.
4 out of the 6.
We're all in the same ward.
Kids, yeah.
And then they split the ward. So I was in a different ward from all the kids, except the one that lived with me.
Right.
So that lasted for a year and a half. And then they were putting the wards back together again. And I assume, because then I was going to see that things were not the same in the family, the first one to talk to me came and said, and this was like a week before we were meeting back together, came and said, our family is out of the church. We're leaving. We're out. We're not in the process. We are out. And I had no clue.
Yeah.
No clue. So then the next morning I was driving to meet the wife of that person to babysit, and I got a call from Utah.
Me?
No, it was Katie.
Oh,
and
Katie.
She said, have you talked to Allan? And I said, no. And I mean, I was a basket case.
Sure.
I can't hide it. It was devastating to me.
Of course.
Just the one.
Yeah.
So I'm driving the very next day, and Katie says, have you talked to Allan? And I said, not recently. What's up? She goes, well, I think you should talk to him. She hinted to the fact that it had something to do with the church. For some reason, we had a bad connection, and it cut out. And it was, by the time I got to the meeting place, I was pretty much.
You're a mess.
I was a mess. She asked me what's wrong, and I said something, and we don't need to talk about that conversation, but
it was not an easy conversation.
It wasn't easy, and I was just blown away at what was happening.
Yeah. Do you feel like, so this first child that told you that his family was taken off, leaving the church, I mean, there's no good way of doing it, I guess.
There is no, I mean, I can't imagine doing that.
Doesn't matter how, but was there anything about the way that he did it that you appreciated? Did it feel like he knew that this was going to be difficult for you?
Well, he took the time necessary. I mean, he didn't say this and then go home. He had actually picked me up at the airport I'd come home from a trip to California, and he stayed until, I didn't have any more to say.
Sure.
And one of the complications too was that my oldest son was the bishop, and so when I returned home from picking up the grandchild to babysit, I called him and I said, "What is going on?" I said, "Cameron talked to me last night," and he's like, "Well, what did he tell you? What did he say?" He had to be the confidential bishop,
right?
And until I said what I.
Then he kind of let I've talked to him.
And then he could kind of talk to me a little bit, but still
sure,
not a lot.
Yeah.
Now, there was another child who had been kind of not in and out, just kind of out, but not for reasons that I thought were doctrinal.
Sure.
So that was 3. And then in the following months, the 4th child started.
Am I the 4th?
No.
Oh.
I thought
you
and Cameron were about almost the same time.
Okay.
And then the 4th one talked to me about. We talked the whole time.
Yeah.
That decision was being made.
Okay, so she actually took a different approach.
Yeah.
Of talking through it as it was happening.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't say that the end result was any easier, but the process was, and I had more understanding for what she was doing and what was happening.
So would you say in general, in your experience, in general, you would say that knowing earlier makes it easier for you to understand?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I still don't never totally understand, but I don't really understand exactly the process for you. You've told me we had a couple of pretty
we did have a few
good conversations where you explained a lot, but I still, if I was to try and replay what your experience was, I have a much clearer picture of hers because
she was involving you with it.
Yeah.
And maybe not all parents would have the emotional stamina to be with their kid at every step of the way, especially when it ends with them leaving. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. And I know one thing that was upsetting to me.
Sure.
Was I found out pretty soon on that several of you had been on a chat room together for quite a while. I don't know how long, but that really hurt.
So we have a private chat that we can talk about our things. Is that to this day? Is it something that you understand the need for now, or is it still something like?
Things have happened to me in the last 3 years?
Yeah,
2, 3.
3. Yeah.
One of the things that has happened is that I realize that I am a different generation than you, and I'm a mother, and you guys are all peers, and
right.
I'm not a peer.
Yeah.
Someone else actually said that to me. I went to counseling for a while after this. I don't understand why, but the experience of 4 children leaving the church was infinitely more difficult for me than losing Dad.
Wow.
I don't know why. I mean, you wouldn't think that would be the case, but
is there a part of it that feels like I lost him? Does the doctrine come into it? I lost him physically, but we're going to be together. But if they make this choice,
that's part of it. Yeah.
Are we going to be together?
And I felt a great sustaining spirit when Dad went through that, and lots of positive thoughts came to my mind all the time. That didn't happen for a long time. There have been more.
There have been more positive thoughts now.
Positive
I think that's where we'd like to go next, is being a little more specific about some of the difficult aspects of a child leaving, and then some of the things that have helped you a little bit more. So we just mentioned briefly the doctrinal side of it, of if they're making this decision, what does my heaven look like? What is the next life when we're supposed to be together? What's going to happen? How prevailing of a thought is that?
That's pretty.
Still to this day?
It's just the fact that, for me, that belief and that testimony is so strong.
Yeah. And
so to think that the people that are closest to me don't share that, it's pretty hard.
Yeah, I understand.
I for a while, I don't know how many weeks, but I couldn't even walk in the church without crying.
I remember
it was horrible.
I remember in 2018 when Jackson received the priesthood. Do you remember this day?
I do remember that day.
We did that in
very
Georgia.
Clearly.
We were in the pew and one of the songs was being sung. And do you remember the interaction between you and me?
Mm-hmm.
You wrapped your arm around me and said, "I am so sorry. This must be such a hard day for you." And I was super, super impressed that you had the emotional intelligence and empathy to feel what I was feeling at the moment.
Well, I felt that was a blessing to me because it was a very, what would you say, turmoil. The whole experience was filled with turmoil.
Yeah, it was.
And I, it's easy to say, well, if you hadn't done this, it wouldn't be turmoil, or
sure, or
you wouldn't, if, but I just remember feeling that love for you. And I take that as one of my cherished experiences. Because I feel like that's the pure love of Christ, and it came through, and that's what I felt through the whole blessing.
Well, I felt that love big time. So thank you for that moment.
Good.
That was a big moment in our relationship personally. What else, as far as difficulties, seeing your kids start to make different choices? Was that hard? So Word of Wisdom comes to mind of that's a very easy to see different physical choice that they're making. What was that?
That's it's very strange.
And are all things created equal? Is it just as hard to see coffee versus alcohol?
I don't know that alcohol seems a little more because
dramatic.
because I've seen bad results from alcohol consumption.
People typically don't hurt others when they're drinking coffee.
Right. Yeah. And last summer was very difficult, as you know.
Yeah, we had, I think we mentioned it here, but we had a karaoke night one night. I think that behind the scenes, a few of us that had left were hoping that it could be a night that everyone came, both believers and not. Not that we classified it that way, but just we wanted to invite everybody over, and we would have the cooler with any assortment of drinks far away from the action, so that if anybody wanted a drink, they can go get it. So we had this utopian idea of how this night was going to go, and it didn't go that way. I mean, it ended up that Katie was the only person that really was still in the church that came, until some of the nieces and nephews showed up, the adult nieces and nephews, a few hours in. And for us, it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. But on the other side, there was what was happening in your mind that night.
Well, actually, by that point, I was, in fact, I felt like at the beginning of that summer, I was a little bit dreading the whole summer, because I knew things had progressed, and, the shift or the split was more.
Right.
But I had this neat experience. I was actually listening to a podcast, and it was about how to handle, when your loved ones leave, when a loved one leaves the church.
Did you listen to it 4 times?
I did listen to
good.
it 4 times. But anyway, I got this, I don't know what you'd call it, but I felt like it was a revelation or an inspiration to stay above the fray the whole summer, just enjoy the people.
Yeah.
Not get, embroiled in all the stuff. And if there's something that I don't want to go to, then say don't go. Cameron, who was the host of that night, was kind enough to tell me beforehand that there might be alcohol there.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that. And I said, okay, well, I think I'll stay home. And I was glad I did. Yeah. And I didn't really react strongly in any way. I mean, I just felt like the only reaction I had was that one of my kids said they felt like they were being judged. And I said, well, I want you to know I wasn't judging you. I did not want to see my children do that thing.
Yeah.
I didn't want to witness it. And maybe in a way that's a judgment, but I didn't feel like I was saying, oh my gosh, you're so bad. Right. Don't. I have bad memories of people drinking too much in my past, and I didn't want to see any of my family in that situation. Yeah. I don't think it happened, but
it didn't.
It's just the possibility. And,
sure.
And so I just stayed home and then next day watched the drama unfold.
Any other things that your kids would say or do or not say or do that would make this more difficult? Is there any ways of speaking to you or things that you had a child say that, for example, I feel like you're judging me? Was there anything like that was like that made it harder that this was happening?
Well, I think our situation was, I never can think of the word, but not exaggerated, but exacerbated by the fact that there were 4.
Right.
And so when we were together, I did feel like there was a division, and that, discussions were being had with those 4, and that the rest of us were not part of, or whatever, but also vice versa. I don't know. One of the hardest things for me is grandchildren, because it makes me sad that they're not getting the benefits of, the gospel in some cases.
Sure. And
I don't feel like I can really be involved in that. I just don't feel that's my place.
Right. I think a lot of people listening wish that their parents would feel that way, because it's very hard as a parent if some parents decide to go the opposite route. Instead of acknowledging that this is not my child, it's not within my responsibility, or even it's not appropriate for me to do that. Some of them do it behind the scenes. Some parents will pull kids aside and be as blatant as saying, no matter what you do not follow your dad. I mean, that's divisive. Yeah. That's really bad. Yeah. I've never felt threatened from you and I almost said or dad, of course not. But I've never felt
you may
threatened.
be a bigger threat, actually.
That's true. Let's see. But yeah, I've never felt that.
Well, quite early on, I had the feeling very strongly that I had been able to raise my family the way I wanted to, that I chose to raise them, and that my kids deserved the same opportunity.
Yeah.
And I'm by nature not a
meddler.
Yeah.
You don't meddle.
Yeah, I don't.
I agree.
Meddle.
You don't meddle.
But that's a little difficult because, like I said, I felt like the church helped you guys through a lot of difficult situations, and now there's so many more, and I just worry about my grandkids.
Sure. So do you think that there are other ways of accomplishing the same goals, whether it's belief systems or philosophies of raising children that can have the same outcome for your kids that the gospel did? And that might be a really complicated question.
It is complicated. I mean, I think there are a lot of wonderful people that are not LDS.
Right.
I think the gospel is a source of great wisdom, no matter what church is teaching it, because the basics are the same. I think that that's a big benefit for a family. I think it is possible to raise good, strong, morally strong people. I think it's possible. I think it's a lot harder without the gospel. I mean,
rewinding an hour now, it provided a structure. It provided a manual of this is how you do it.
Yeah.
So especially when you, trust me, just so you know, as a parent, stepping outside of that structure, it's confusing and hard for me too. It's one of those things that it's like, I'm not trying to step away from all the benefits and all the good that I acknowledge that it gave me. I don't believe it anymore. I have no choice but to step away. And in some ways I felt like I was pushed away, not by you by any means. And so it's one of those, I'm not choosing to not have this. I just have to figure out what to do now. Mm-hmm. And thank you for acknowledging that. Clearly, I know the gospel means the world to you, especially the gospel through the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm not pretending to say that you are acknowledging that other paths are just as good, but you are acknowledging that there are other ways to bring up morally strong, good kids.
Yes.
Cool. That felt like more of a line of questioning you would see in a jury trial. I want to be clear, Mrs. Mount.
Is this what you mean?
Okay, so this is going longer than we expected, but
you'll cut it and it's
fine. I'm not going to cut it. I think it's great. We've had episodes that have gone this long before. I will ask now, because I think this is pretty important for other parents that may be listening. This is probably an episode that some of our listeners are going to share with their family. If their parents are brand new to this is 2017 for them. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4 more kids that have stepped away. Those first few months, those first few years, even today, can be difficult. What are the things that have been very helpful? Whether something that your child has done, maybe we'll start there. Is there anything that your kids have done that have actually helped in the process?
Well, my kids have been very consistent in maintaining a good relationship. I haven't felt like the relationship itself has suffered as much as it could have if there had been more antagonism between us. For a while, I felt like, and maybe this is just the victim attitude, but I felt like there wasn't a lot of concern about how is this affecting you, Mom?
Yeah.
But again, I mean, that's a difficult, I don't know what I would have said if you had said, how is this affecting you and what can I do?
Yeah.
But I really felt alone, really alone for a long time, because if Dad had been there, I could have shot it off with him and talked about him, and he would have taken it. I don't know what he would have done, but
that's actually, trust me, I've thought a lot about how would this have gone differently with Dad. the late stages dad, much more compassionate and loving.
Have been, yeah.
If this would have happened in 2002, it may, oh boy, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. And somebody in the family made the comment that at one point that, well, I don't think it would have happened if Jim was still around. And then that made me feel like, what am I, chopped liver? I mean, what is my testimony worth, or what is my opinion worth? Because if it wouldn't have happened if he was here, what difference, I mean, I can respond to that. You understand what I feel?
Yeah, no, I can respond to that real quick. There's a couple of ways to think that. The accident itself, thinking of if Dad wasn't around, or if he was still around, it wouldn't have happened. There is a line of thought that says, the way that I explain it is that when Dad passed, it kind of chinked my emotional armor, so that I was when I was confronted with information that was difficult to reconcile, I was emotionally prepared to accept an alternative answer. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. So my entire experience with Dad had nothing to do with my beliefs, nothing to do with it, but it probably opened me up emotionally to be susceptible to things, to thinking different ways. Mm-hmm. So that's one. But the other side is, if he's still around and he's what you said a little while ago of, well, as long as they're in my house, they're going to go to church. If that's the attitude that he takes, I don't think that stops the change. I think that just makes it more private. I think the kids would change, especially if we're not in the same ward. If I'm here in Utah, we have a lot of listeners that say, oh, I've been out of the church for 7 years and my parents don't know because they live in Maryland and I'm in California.
Well, I really think what triggered it with the first one was that we were going to be back in the same building.
And so he was going to be confronted with it. I was going
to see that, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, some of those milestones are really difficult. Oh, we've got a baptism in a year. I'm going to have to say something unless my bishop lets me do it. Am I okay with doing that? So there's a lot of these moments that kind of force the situation.
Some of the things that are hard for me to look at are the struggles that my kids have. And I always felt like the fact that Dad and I were united in religion was one less struggle. I mean, we had our struggles. Sure. Just like everybody else, but that one was not one of them. Mm-hmm. I mean, we never doubted each other as far as our strength or faith or whatever. Yeah. And another thing is that I felt like I have had a lifetime of experience of seeing the result of living the gospel and knowing that these things came because of it.
Right.
Now, like you just said a few minutes ago, there are other ways, and there are other ways. And I think I've realized that more recently.
Sure.
For a long time, I probably felt like the reason things have gone the way they've gone is because we've been faithful and trying to be faithful.
Do you think that you've learned any lessons in your children leaving that have been a blessing? You've learned lessons or ways of thinking, ways of coping, ways of understanding that you otherwise wouldn't have learned?
Well, I've grown to appreciate the importance of agency and the fact that everybody goes through their own life, and everybody goes through their own set of challenges, and everybody makes their own decisions. Whatever one person goes through, that's what they are given, and that's what they have to do. And it's not a cookie cutter thing. Sure. My kids are not all going to go the same way. And maybe I had expected more of that. I don't know.
Yeah.
So just appreciating each person's own right to live their life the way they see the best.
We're kind of jumping all over, but
I know
this. No.
Well, things keep coming to my mind.
I know, and I keep asking questions that aren't on this specific topic. But was there a point then you've learned that lesson of agency? I think that ties into you not, quote, blaming yourself. Was there any point where you felt like, if I would have done this, or if I could have stopped this?
I really didn't have a lot of problem with that.
Good.
And not that I felt like I was this great, perfect mother, but and Dad and I even talked about this a few times, that we felt like we were doing the best we could with what we had been given as far as training and being, taught ourselves. And I know there are things we could have done better, but on the other hand, I don't know if we could have done any differently in the situation that we were. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I felt like we did try hard.
That one
I'll say
family,
try hard.
You tried hard.
Yes.
That one family home evening that you missed, that didn't ruin everything, right?
We missed quite a few.
Well, with 6 kids and everybody playing 3 sports, I think it was impossible to not miss something.
But that was a blessing that maybe a lot of people do feel a lot of that.
Yeah.
You know, oh gosh, I must have made a big mistake.
Sure. So what other positive resources did you find? Whether it's things that your kids did or said, or you mentioned a podcast. Do you want to tell everyone a few podcasts that you listened to that were helpful?
Well, I've listened to Jody Moore.
Yeah.
And at that time
in this space.
Sure. She was addressing some of those very things.
So that would have been summer of 2019, spring of 2019.
Maybe 18, partly.
Okay.
I don't know.
So you can go back and look at those. I think she may
started.
readdress the same issues after X amount of time. But Jody Moore,
she was the one that gave that one podcast that really helped me with that summer experience.
I remember you talking to me about that during that
the summer experience.
The three things you can do to...
3 things you should do and 3 things you shouldn't do.
Do you remember what they were? At least any of them?
Got them written down. One was...
Never sit down to record a podcast with one of your kids.
The 3 don'ts were J's. One was probably judging. Mm-hmm. Jurisdiction. That was a big one.
Okay, so it's not your responsibility.
It's
their agency.
It's their agency.
You've learned that for sure.
And, the last one with a J was a funny word. Like jitters or I can't remember what it was. Anyway.
Sometimes they stretch the alliterations to...
Yeah. And then the positive things were, one of them I remember was curiosity. Ask the person. And that was a big one for me.
Was that hard to do?
It was, but I did it with a couple of, and it was always a good experience.
Well, I remember we walked up Ensign Peak together.
We've talked more than
And that was in the fall of 2017. So that was pretty early. That was before you learned that lesson from the podcast, at least.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
I brought up CES letter, and we talked about, truth claim stuff.
Yeah.
We didn't fight. I remember talking passionately about a few things,
yeah.
but I don't feel like we left the conversation bad.
No, I don't.
Good. I'm glad we feel the same way.
Yeah.
That's good.
No,
okay,
that was a good one. I remember specifically asking one of my family that was probably a year after, or how are you doing down a year, a year from when you've made this decision? And we had a nice little talk about, everything wasn't rosy, but
sure.
But they were working through it, and
yeah.
So.
You recently started reading like David Osler's Bridges book. Well, you mentioned to me a few weeks ago when we were delivering laundry, because we didn't want you to go to a laundromat.
That's right. They've been my laundry servants. You
mentioned you had read a little bit of that. Are there any other kind of sources that have been helpful for you? And they can be church sources too. I mean, if certain talks or anything that has been helpful.
I can't think of anything specific. I know I read some of Planted. Mm-hmm. I haven't finished
Patrick
it.
Mason. I've got a copy in there.
Yeah.
I know.
I was looking for lots of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think one of my other kids got me 2 little church things that were related to when a child goes astray, or when a child makes a different choice, and those were helpful. Because
and were they books?
They were, 1/4-inch softback books. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that they did that. When Mormons Doubt, was that one?
No.
Navigating a Mormon Faith Crisis, Thomas McConkie?
I've read some of that.
Okay.
But that wasn't it.
That wasn't it
No,
either.
These were like little... Huh. Yeah, I've still got them. I'll have to look up the name of it.
Sure.
But just, I think, listening to leaders of the church and their advice, and there's been some really good talks to parents about, how to handle it and how to navigate it, and...
So
it's always love that comes through to me.
To me, I'm glad that you said that.
To the top of the
sure.
talks. I know it's not always
it's not always that way. I think that, it shows you tend to see and receive messages based on where you're at.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
There's no other way to receive them.
Yep.
I remember, and maybe this will be one of the last things we talk about, but we had a little bit of a difficult exchange in the April 2019 General Conference after President Nelson's Come Unto Me talk.
Oh.
Do you remember that?
Yes. You were in Arizona?
I was in Arizona. Good memory.
Because it was on the phone. We had to talk.
I remember that. It was his talk. Was that one of... How did you feel after that talk?
Well, I felt a little sad.
What this is known as, I don't know if you would ever heard this before, but this is known as the sad heaven talk.
Oh.
This is, you're going to get to heaven, and are you going to see your family? Like, it matters. It depends on what you do. Do you want your family to be there? It was the sad heaven talk. So you were sad afterwards.
I was sad thinking about the possible feelings that, especially Katie, that she might be having. And one thing that I really feel strongly about is that this life is not all. It's not over with this life, and we're gonna go on learning. We're gonna go on progressing, and so I don't feel like, okay, when we die, that's it.
Sure,
the decision is made.
Sure.
I just don't feel that. So it didn't have a particularly strong negative feeling for me. Until I talked to you.
Until you talked to me, and I let you know how I was feeling.
And I realized how, and it's good to realize how would that come across. I mean, there was this last conference that I didn't take it. I do remember feeling like, oh, that's different language for him.
Unruly child, yeah.
Yeah, that was a different language for him, but I didn't...
Didn't sting.
It didn't sting, and I felt like I knew what he was... I felt like I knew what he was trying to convey. And so then when you had that reaction, I thought, wow, it is amazing how two people can get a very different reaction.
For sure. I mean, I knew that here's the great thing about where we're at in our relationship, and same thing with Katie, is that I don't feel that anything either a leader of the church or a leader outside of the church says is going to affect our relationship. If a leader of the church said, I don't know, maybe this is going a bit strong, but if a leader of the church said you need to distance yourself from family members that have left the church, I don't know that you would do it. I don't think that they would say something so blatant like that. So it's kind of, I'm making an example that probably isn't very realistic, but I didn't, in that moment when President Uchtdorf said those words, I had no fear over Katie thinking that I was an unruly child, you thinking I was an unruly child. A lot of people aren't in that same situation where talks like that are used against them. And I was worried that some family members that are still on both sides of our families, both mine and Katie, that would be filed into the little category of their opinion of me. And that's really hard and that's really frustrating. And so, yeah.
Well, no, because I've watched your process and it's been, I know how painful it's been.
It's tough.
It's been not something that you did because you were, trying to...
I didn't want it to happen.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with the conclusion or not.
Right.
So
it's a painful thing.
For sure. I'm glad that we have, hopefully people can hear in an hour and a half conversation that we have a good relationship. We can't touch.
No, not yet.
How are we not going to hug at the end of this? But we're not somehow. Not that we're in an unventilated office that, you're probably breathing. We're all breathing the same air. So maybe I should hug you. Anyway,
I want to say one more thing.
Oh, please do. Let's not stop. Go ahead.
This is just a little thing.
Please do.
I don't know if you remember, there was a testimony meeting in Georgia when I think you were there on a business trip and you just popped in. We didn't know you were coming or whatever. And all 6 of the kids were in the meeting, and I got up and bore my testimony, and I said several things, but one thing I said was that my testimony was strengthened by watching my children in their living the gospel and how that strengthened my testimony, and I've learned in the 4 years since that our testimony can't be, I guess it could be strengthened by other people, but it can't be based on other people.
Right.
I've looked closer at my testimony and why I believe the things I believe, and it's kind of made me more conscious of, why I'm doing the things I'm doing, and I've kind of had to build up my own strength again. I mean,
Right.
it kind of shot the ground out from under me. And I think after Dad died, I really depended on the family a lot more. And I've kind of had to become more independent, I think, is what...
So that could
spiritually and otherwise.
Yeah. So I think maybe that's another kind of gift, quote unquote, of what has happened. It's not all hard and learning to be more independent is hard. But it's a struggle that you wouldn't necessarily have had to go through if this hadn't happened. I think that's what we see in mixed faith marriage too. This isn't something we would have chosen to go into. We don't recommend faith crises for anyone.
I don't either.
And we don't recommend people go into a mixed faith marriage on purpose, especially after they started the relationship in one faith. It's not something you look to do. But when it happens, there are positives that come of it. And in fact, Katie and I have seen that there are more positives. And it's because of the struggle. It's because of the difficult lessons that have to be learned that make it a positive experience. There's a lot of bumps and bruises along the way, and healing from those. It's the same as lifting weights. You rip those muscles to make them stronger. And so you get hurt along the way, but you recover from it. Anything else you would like to say?
I could end on a negative note.
Oh, you have one more negative thing?
I'm not to the point yet where I look back and think, I'm glad this happened because I wouldn't be experiencing this if it hadn't.
Right. Well, I don't know that I would say the same about our relationship. I don't look back and say, I'm glad this happened. But I can look, maybe, did I just contradict myself? Did I say that?
No, I just wanted to clarify that.
No, I'm glad that you said that.
I'm not on that position
And
yet.
I understand that. I don't think I'm glad that Katie and I are in the situation we're in either. I just recognize that there are positives, for sure.
Yeah.
So if there are other parents of those that have transitioned away from the church that are listening, what parting words of advice or any kind of message, a positive message, we'll say,
a positive
would you have for them?
I think what I've said most recent was that I have really looked inside as to why I have lived the life I've lived and why I have made the decisions I've just made.
Yeah.
And really, what were those based on? And it goes back to spiritual experiences that I've had. And so I've remembered those. And I've been grateful for him.
Elaine, thank you very much. I'll just say it. Mom, thank you very much.
Love you.
Love you too.